You're listening to the Just Japan podcast. Everything you want to know about Japan.
Well, hey there, folks, and welcome to another episode of the Just Japan podcast. Everything you want to know about Japan. My name is Kevin O'Shea, and I am the host of the Just Japan podcast, a weekly podcast that brings to you different aspects of life in Japan, different things, all Japanese, often coming from a foreign perspective here in Japan. And this week, we have another amazing episode. It's number 114. Isn't that amazing, folks? 114 episodes. And this week, I'll be talking to Sean Michael Wilson. And Sean Michael Wilson is a manga writer here in Japan. That's right. He is a professional comic book writer who lives and works here in Japan. Writing Japanese comics, coming up with stories, being creative. And it's a great interview. And I learned a lot because this is definitely a topic I don't know anything about. I don't know anything about the manga industry. And I got to admit, don't skew me on this one, guys, or skewer me on this one, I should say. I don't read manga, but I know so many of you awesome people out there do love manga. You do love Japanese comics, and I'm going to be interviewing an actual foreign manga writer who is making a living here in Japan doing that. So, over the years, many people have asked me questions about this. Kevin, how can I become a manga writer in Japan? And of course, I'm always like, I don't know. I've got no idea because I don't know anything about this. Well, in this week's episode, I bring on board someone who does know how you can become a professional manga writer in Japan. Or at least he knows how he became one, and he shares his story. But he also does share a lot of great advice. So you guys are lucky. Really cool episode coming up. So the rainy season here in Japan is pretty much over, and it rained a lot. It was short, it was wet, very wet, more wet than in previous years. I think in the 8 years I've lived here in Japan, this was probably we had the most precipitation as opposed to other years. But last weekend, the Canada Day, July 4th, American Independence Day weekend, summer hit us with a vengeance, a kick in the face here in Kobe, Japan, in the Kansai region. Incredible humidity, incredible heat, incredible nastiness, incredible discomfort. My house, we broke down and we turned on the air conditioner for the first time on Saturday. We got two little kids and they're sweaty, they're uncomfortable, they're nasty. And nasty as in they feel nasty. Not as in they are nasty because they're wonderful. But we turned on the AC in the house for the first time and we've had it on. I'm recording this on Monday, the 4th of July. And by the way, a belated happy 4th of July to all of my American listeners and friends out there. A happy Independence Day. I hope you had a great Independence Day long weekend in America. Hope you barbecued, saw fireworks, had a great time. But yeah, so this weekend marks the weekend that summer is here to punch us in the face with discomfort and nastiness. And you heard 2 weeks ago, myself and friends of the show, Andrew Higgins, Jim Mullins, and PJ, we talked about summer in Japan and how nasty it can be, mostly due to the humidity. So summer is here with a vengeance, and typhoon season is approaching as well. The first typhoons of the season have been forming in the Pacific Ocean. The Pacific Ocean. And by the way, a typhoon, if it's in the Atlantic Ocean, it's called a hurricane. The Pacific Ocean, it is a typhoon. If it's down around Australia, it's called a tropical cyclone. They're all the same thing. Exactly the same thing. They just have different names depending on which ocean they're in and where they're located. So weather was really bad, and it's nasty, it's hot. It's not good, guys. It's not good. So aside from the weather being bad, I just wanted to mention, because I forgot to mention earlier, you can always find the Just Japan podcast on iTunes, on Stitcher Internet Radio, on SoundCloud, and on Libsyn. And all of those links will be in the show notes, the home of the Just Japan podcast, justjapanstuff.com. Go to justjapanstuff.com to find all the back episodes of the Just Japan podcast, various ways to listen to us. Also, for a lot of blog posts about just cool stuff in Japan, because from time to time I write blogs about life in Japan and all that stuff. Yeah, it's true. I do. Folks, don't forget, you can always follow the Just Japan podcast on social media. Go to our Facebook page. It's an awesome community. It's a fun place. It's a great place to hang out. Link is in the show notes at justjapanstuff.com. Come over and like it. Follow me on Twitter at JLandKev, JLandKev, JLandKev. Lots of fun tweets about Japan there. And of course, follow my Instagram feed if you want to see Japan in a very cool way. Instagram.com/JLandKev, JLandKev. I love spending time on Instagram. You guys should come on over and like it. And of course, you can always follow me on YouTube at BusanKevin and JLandKev. All right. So I also wanted to mention that the Teespring, the Just Japan podcast t-shirt campaign, the Teespring t-shirt campaign has come and gone. It's finished. It's done. No more chances to buy a t-shirt, but a lot of you out there did buy a t-shirt, and that's awesome. It's being shipped to you right now as you speak. So I can't wait to see you guys out there wearing your Just Japan podcast t-shirts. And when mine arrives here in Japan, I'll be sporting my Just Japan podcast t-shirt, and you'll see lots of photos of it. In the future, there may be another t-shirt campaign. We'll see. Maybe I'll get some kind of cool slogan or logo or some kind of silly Japanese stuff written on it. We'll see. So we're coming up on the interview portion of the podcast, everyone. I had the great fortune of sitting down with a professional manga writer, Sean Michael Wilson, who is based out of Kumamoto, Japan. We talk about life as kind of his story of becoming a comic book writer, him being a comic book writer here in Japan. He also gives advice and tips on how you might be able to get a job writing comics in Japan. And he also briefly talks about the Kumamoto earthquakes, because that is something that affected him directly. So sit on back, get yourself a drink, get yourself a snack, something, find a comfortable place to chillax, and listen to this week's interview portion of the Just Japan podcast.
We're sorry, the number you have dialed is not in service at this time.
Hey there, folks. One little quick note before we jump into the interview. Myself and Sean had really bad internet connections and Skype connections during this interview. So in the beginning, the sound quality isn't the best, and we actually dropped off several times on his end and my end. So he lost internet connectivity and had to jump onto his phone to Skype, and then I lost internet connectivity. So there you go. Also, as I listen and post, I realize, and I don't have the time to go back and re-record, that I had my floor fan in the Just Japan podcast studio on, because I don't have air conditioning in my podcasting room, my podcasting studio. And I realized that I had the fan on pretty high. So it does sound for the first, 7 or 8 minutes of the podcast that we were in a bit of a windstorm. Yeah, so I apologize for the poor sound quality in this week's episode. Hey, things happen. We're not a professional outfit. We try our best to sound that way, but sometimes things happen. So again, sit back and enjoy the interview portion of the podcast. Okay, everyone, welcome to episode number 114 of the Just Japan podcast, the interview portion of the show. And this week we're talking about writing manga in Japan. And this week's guest is Sean Michael Wilson. So, Sean, thank you for joining us.
You're welcome, Kevin.
Awesome. Now,
I am awesome, actually. Yes.
Yeah.
How did you know?
Oh, I could sense it's a Scottish accent. Hey, can you, to begin things this evening, can you maybe tell us just quickly a little bit about yourself, where you're from, and what you do here in Japan?
Yes, well, I'm from Scotland. I'm from an Irish family, as you are originally as well, of course.
Yes.
And I've lived in Japan for several years now, but I don't live in Tokyo. This is actually, are you in Tokyo yourself?
No, I live in Kobe.
Oh, right. So this is the thing that probably happens to you as well. Almost everyone presumes that you live in Tokyo.
Yes, that is true.
Everyone presumes that I do, and they say, see you for a drink. What part of Tokyo do you live in? I say, well, actually, I'm way down south. I'm in the deep south,
The deep
in Kyushu and in Kumamoto.
Mm.
And then the next thing they say, if they're Japanese, the next thing they say, it's Hinaka. And because this is a big city, actually. This is as big a city as San Francisco. Or where did you say you're from? Ontario?
Well, actually, I grew up in rural Nova Scotia, and Nova Scotia is Latin for New Scotland.
Of course.
I grew up in Nova Scotia, Canada, and I grew up in actually a little village of probably less than 1,000 people.
Well, there you are. I moved from Edinburgh to a village of 3,000 people in the Scottish countryside.
Okay.
When I was 14, so that's a similar experience maybe. But Kumamoto is 700,000 people, which is about the same size as San Francisco, I think it is, and it would be the third or fourth biggest city in Britain if it was somehow magically to appear in Britain overnight. So this is a big place actually. So I've lived here for several years, and I am a comic book writer,
Okay.
and I did that when I was in Britain too. And that's been literally my childhood dream, to be a comic book creator since I was 12 years old. And I first bought a comic called 2000 AD in Scotland, in Edinburgh. And I don't know, have you heard of 2000 AD?
I have to admit, no, I haven't. Sorry.
No, have you seen the film Judge Dredd?
Yes, I have.
Well,
that was with Sylvester Stallone, I believe.
Yes. Yeah.
Sly himself.
That was, when was that? Was
that was in the 90s?
Mid-90s.
Mid-90s.
And they did a better and more realistic one a couple of years ago, which was pretty good, and also called Judge Dredd. Anyway, he is the main character, or one of the main characters from 2000 AD. So me and most of my pals, when we were kids in Edinburgh, we loved 2000 AD. And we had a wee group. It's me, Barry John McNally, David McFadgen, and Christopher Temple. That was the five of us. Okay. And we all wanted to make our own comics because we just loved them.
Okay.
And out of the bunch of us, I guess I never matured enough to give up the dream. Well, in a way, I mean, I'm joking, of course, but in a way, that's true.
No, I totally get what you mean. Yeah. I'm laughing, kind of in an understanding way.
You know,
I'm a big kid inside.
Well, the thing is that sometimes people ask you, if you've made a success, so-called, at anything, people say, well, to what do you attribute your success? And a lot of times, the answer to that would be foolishness. That you didn't realize what a kind of unobtainable, silly idea it was, to be whatever. So I think in my case, that's probably true. I never really realized what kind of difficult, unobtainable thing it would be. I just kept at it. And through a mixture of hard work and a bit of luck and that kind of foolish naivety, I've managed to make a half decent success of it.
Nice. That's great. And now here you are in Kumamoto, Japan, as a writer. And ironically enough, when you mentioned about Kumamoto, I live in Kobe, and most people often think of, Kobe, they refer to it, if you're from North America, they say Kobe, after Kobe Bryant. And the whole deal with Kobe Bryant is he was apparently named after Kobe steak. Which is very unfortunate when you think about it in some ways. Not to diminish Kobe Bryant, but Kobe is a city of 1.5 million people, and even that
right.
People.
That's big.
That's a big city. That's a huge city. By Canadian standards, I'm a Canuck. There's only probably a couple of other cities in Canada that are of equal size. Actually, probably, Toronto and Montreal would be bigger. Aside from that, if Kobe were dropped into Canada, it would probably be the third biggest city. But by Japan standards, people are like, oh, Kobe, oh, that's nice. That's such a nice small town.
Yes, that's like
you've got the mountains.
Like
you've got the mountains and the ocean.
Well, Kobe is a nice place. I think that's one of the nicest of the medium-sized cities in Japan.
It's a very beautiful city, and I definitely hope someday to make. I've been to Kyushu, several times before, but I've only ever made it to Fukuoka.
Well, Fukuoka's good too.
Oh, Fukuoka is great. Actually, Fukuoka reminds me a lot of Kobe. It's about the same size, kind of, everything's kind of within walking distance downtown. And, it doesn't feel too big. It doesn't feel too small.
And there's a lot of Japanese everywhere.
For some reason, Japanese people are all over the place. And they've got great Hakata ramen. Okay, so you've already kind of mentioned a little bit about your writing dreams, the fact that you, part of the fact that you never grew up is why you are where you are today. But when did you first get into writing? I mean, was writing something you did as a child, as a teenager? Did you write short stories? Did you create your own comics as a kid?
Well, I think it's not so much a question of growing up, because especially as a comic book creator, you have to deal with the idea that the comic books are inherently for children, or that they're a medium and an art form for children, which is completely incorrect and has always been incorrect. So you first of all have to kind of most of us who are comic book creators, professional or amateur, have to struggle to overcome that misconception. And the good thing about that is that misconception is on the wane.
What we were talking about was you were basically talking. You started talking about how traditionally people kind of, when they think of comic book writing or comic books, they think that it's an art form geared towards children. But there's kind of a sea change now, a shift.
Well, it's not in Britain anyway. It's not. There's a long way to go. There's a bit of a comic book renaissance in Britain over the last maybe 5, 6, 7 years. And that's wonderful. But I think we maybe are starting to think that we've won the battle kind of thing, where we've only just managed to establish the beachhead kind of thing. Okay. So there's still a long way to go in terms of increasing the image of comic books as an interesting and intelligent art form in which you can do interesting and intelligent stories, which are suitable for adults. Certainly the idea that comic books is inherently for children is completely wrong. There's no argument could possibly win that point. It's merely just habit and people's ideas, but it's incorrect. The basic thing about comics books is it's a mixture of images and text. That's what comic books are. Now, what possible argument could there be to say that a mixture of images and text is inherently for teenagers or for kids? Road signs are a mixture of images and text. You can do anything with a mixture of images and text, and you can do it at any level, just as you can do music at any level. You do music for kids and you can do music for adults. You can do whole symphonies, and comics is exactly the same as that. You can do it at any level of maturity or sophistication. For myself, me and my friends, when we were kids, we loved comic books in the normal way that kids did at that time in Britain. And so we all decided that we'd get together and we'd do our own comic. This is when we were all in school in Edinburgh, secondary school as we call it in Britain, high school. And so it was myself, Barry John McNally, who lives in Thailand now, Christopher Temple and David McFadgen, and the bunch of us got together and started our own comic when we were 12 or 13. Okay. And essentially, I've just kept going from that, and never gave up that dream. But what I did later was, of course, I then got into also so-called serious literature, high literature. Okay. And I started to read a lot, like Franz Kafka and the Argentinian writer Borges. But for me, that writing was never any more impressive or serious or real than the comic books, like Alan Moore's comic books or Eddie Campbell, that I'd been reading since I was 13. and 2000 AD, the British comic I've been reading since I was 12.
Yeah.
A lot of that stuff from the early 80s was very sophisticated and very mature. So that, for instance, Alan Moore's V for Vendetta,
Oh, okay. Yeah.
which of course has been made into a reasonably good film. Actually, a lot of people dislike it, but I think it was quite good. That stuff I still rank as being as sophisticated and interesting and artistic as any novels that I've ever read, or any films, or any other kind of piece of artwork. It certainly influences me just as much.
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to think of. Well, I mean, I think back to my days when I was a kid growing up in Canada, and what comics influenced me. And honestly, I was, and for whatever reason, I don't know why it spoke to me. I don't know why I found it so interesting. None of my friends were interested in this comic, but I was fascinated with Daredevil. And ironically enough, I've been kind of cut off from a lot of modern pop culture for a long time. And only recently, in the last couple of months, I've got myself a Netflix account. And I've started watching the new Daredevil series. And wow, pretty impressive. And that is definitely something that is not for children.
Well, I haven't seen that. Unfortunately, I watch almost no modern American stuff at all. Although I've seen the Game of Thrones and The Walking Dead, and I like them. Of course, they come from comics or are influenced by comics.
Exactly. Yeah, The Walking Dead. I'm a fan of. Game of Thrones, I haven't yet got into, but what I'm yetn't. There's a new word for you. I'm creative, everyone. I'm creative with language, even though it doesn't make sense. But okay, so I mean, you're now working as a manga, Kevin, manga writer. So I'm curious, was manga something that you were aware of before you came to Japan, or is that something that once you arrived here, it was something that you caught on to?
You pronounce it, I think, North Americans, because I know you're not from the United States of America.
Actually,
manga.
I'm gonna be honest. Like, yeah.
Oh.
I mean, that was the first time I've slipped on that in years when I said manga. And
well, we pronounce it manga in Britain, or I do anyway.
Yeah, I know. Well,
I think you North Americans pronounce it manga, but anyway, whatever.
Yeah.
We're probably both
tomato, right? Tomato, potato. Yeah. So when did you first discover this art form?
Well, the first manga which I read was in the mid 80s.
Okay.
About 86 or 87, but it wasn't particularly a huge revelation for me. It was just another interesting comic book. And that the first one, I think, was my the Psychic Girl was the English translation. I think it was put out by Dark Horse or First Comics, maybe. They don't exist anymore. And I just liked it because it was well made. And actually, even now, it's a kind of a weird thing to say, but I live in Japan, I work with Japanese publishers, I work with Japanese artists every day, but I'm not a manga expert. I'm not really a deep manga fan. Now that seems weird, because how can that possibly be when you're doing them every day? Well, the answer to that is I'm doing them every day. I'm not researching and being a fan about them every day. I'm making them. So in a way, I don't really have time to become a manga expert.
Do you know? I completely get what you're saying. And those of you out there listening, my backstory. I used to work in the game development industry a long time ago. I was a 3D artist. And I worked on 2D scrollers. I worked on 3D games. This is back in the late 90s, early 2000s. And people always used to say to me, Kevin, you must be such a hardcore gamer because you work in the game development industry.
But you're too busy making them.
And that's exactly what I used to say. I'm like, actually, I'm not a big gamer at all. And they would ask me questions about like Zelda. What do you think about this or that? And I'd be like, I don't really know because I haven't played those games. And they're like, what do you mean you haven't played those games? You work at a game company, Kevin. I'm like, yeah, but I work like 15, 20 hours a day.
It's a common misconception, and of course there's a million misconceptions that we human beings have about very silly things. And that's one of them. That quite often a person who's involved doing something doesn't actually have much knowledge about that thing because they're too busy actually doing.
Mm.
Now, of course, they have to have some knowledge of how to technically create that, or how to have the ideas, or how to have the processes, but it doesn't mean that they know every single detail about every single story or every single game or whatever which has happened, because they don't have the time for that.
Yeah, I mean, often a lot of the people who are like that, who do have all that knowledge, have no idea how to draw, or they have no idea how to write. They're just fans of the art form.
Yeah. Which is not to put them down.
No,
of course.
not at all.
It's just different ways of spending your time and different focuses.
Exactly. Yeah.
But sorry, I didn't. I think I still didn't fully.
Yeah. So how did you? I guess I suppose what I'm kind of leading towards is your path to becoming a professional manga artist or writer in Japan.
Yes.
How did you go from living in Scotland, and you're living in Scotland, you've got you and your friends are interested in comics, you're writing comics, and now here you are. You're in Japan, you're a writer, you're doing it. How did that happen? Because, I mean, I got to admit, a lot of people, you don't have to go into great detail, but a lot of people who do listen to this podcast are really interested in anime. They're really interested in manga. And I've had over the years a lot of people ask me the questions like, Kevin, how do I get to Japan? I want to come to Japan and be a manga artist. How do I do it? I'm like, I don't know, because I have no idea. Because I'm a teacher. I'm a teacher with a podcast.
I can give them some information there, because I get asked that question quite a lot. People email me about it.
But yeah, so I'm near the end of the show. We can give that kind of actual the advice portion. But I'm more curious about you. How did you end up in this beautiful land doing what you do?
So, when I started first noticing Japanese manga, as I say, it didn't make a big impression on me. It was just a good book, a good story, good artwork. Just the same as if I might have also picked up a French, like bande dessinée or however they pronounce it, book. And again, it's just an interesting comic book. So I've never really been a huge manga fan specifically. I'm a comic book creator and I love comic books. And manga is one of those books, one of those shelves in my library. And so, but I did obviously specifically decide to come to Japan. And therefore, there must have been some influence for manga for me to do so. But I would say that the main purpose for that really was the fact that the Japanese manga industry is so large. If it had been big in Albania, I might be speaking to you from Albania right now. I mean, this is a very practical point. That Japan is still the biggest manga industry in the world, even though it's declined. It's declined from an extraordinary high level to still a high level.
Okay.
And it's still much larger than America, or way larger than the British.
So you mean in general, like comic books? So much more like people in Japan in general are reading comics a lot more than people are reading comics in America or other countries.
Yes, if we classify just the whole thing as comic books, then they are bought and they are sold and they are influential in Japan more than they are in America or Britain.
Wow. Okay.
And so that, in purely practical terms, is the main reason.
Essentially, going where the work is.
Yes.
Where opportunity lies.
That's right. And of course, then that doesn't mean I did this purely for monetary gain, because almost no one goes into comic books or even animation to make money, because you can make far more money for far less work in a whole bunch of other areas.
Okay, yeah.
It has to be something which you really like doing, in which you wake up in the morning thinking, that's a good idea, and which I still do. I woke up this morning with thinking, that's a good idea, and I wrote it down when I'm still sitting there in my pants. It has to be. It's the kind of thing which you really like doing. And you think of as something worth getting out of bed to do in the morning. And that has to be the central thing. And that goes to advice now. But as for myself, I mean, that's advice to myself too. I realized early on that it's not enough to do a job because you need and want to make money. It has to be some job which is meaningful for you, whatever it is. If you're going to be a fireman or a nurse or whatever, it has to be something which is meaningful for you. So that's the central thing for me, is that being a comic book creator is something which I consider to be a meaningful thing, worth doing, which I enjoy, and that's so hugely important in life.
Yeah. Wanting to get out of bed in the morning and do what you want to do.
Yeah.
I mean, there's so many people who just wake up, that alarm clock goes off in the morning and they dread it, because that means they have to go and do something they don't want to do all day long. Yeah.
Well, and this is a terrible thing, and this is one of the reasons that I am, as it's increasingly popular, I am anti-capitalist. But I've been anti-capitalist since I was still in school, when I was 16 or 17. I don't really remember why now. It's so long ago, but for me, that's one of the key reasons that I'm not keen on the capitalist system, is that most people have to do jobs that they don't like.
Well, I mean, hey, they say it's like winning the lottery when you get to do a job that you love doing. And even if you're not making the big bucks, if you just, you get out of bed every morning and you're just excited to do it, you've won in life.
Yes. But absolutely. So for me, I always wanted to be a comic book creator since I was 12. And so then you made the slip there, of course, which almost everyone else does, also saying that I'm an artist. So I'm not a comic book artist, to make that clear. I'm a comic book writer. And then, of course, the next question is, people say, well, what do comic book writers do?
Exactly. And I'm curious because I don't know. I mean, obviously you write words, but yeah, please tell me, because this is Just Japan podcast listeners. This is where Kevin O'Shea, the host of the podcast, I get to learn stuff, and so do you at the same time. We learn together. What does a comic book writer, a manga writer do?
We should always learn. So a perpetual learner, as Raina Maria Rilke said.
Yeah.
So so the thing, well, it's a little bit, if I use a comparison with movies, when we watch a movie, watch a film, the things which you see, of course, are the actors. You see the people. And therefore, it's natural to presume that films are basically made by actors. Of course, they're not. We know that there's a writer there, and there's a director, and there's a producer. And not to criticize actors too much, but in general, the writer and the director-producer are more responsible for the movie than the actors are. Mm-hmm. But it's the actors that we see. And so therefore, it's very understandable that people will look at the thing which they see, which in comic books, of course, is the art, and think that that's where the thing starts and that's where the thing is created. But comic books are a merger of text and images. As I was saying, that's essentially what comic books are. Text and images, words and pictures. And comic books come alive. The dance of comic books, as Will Eisner, the classic comic book creator, said, comic books is in the dance of art and words, and either can lead the dance at any particular point, but the comic books come alive in that dance. And so the thing about the American and most of the British system is that there is a writer and an artist who work together as a close dance. And so the end product that we see when we pick it up with our hands and it's printed is the final product of those two dancing together. But if to look at the specific stages of how it works, most of the time in the American and British system, the writer will come up with an idea first. Not always. Sometimes the artist will be there from the very beginning too, and the two will work up the idea from stage one. Okay. But quite often a writer will come up with an idea and will write out a plot, which might just be 1 page, it might be 10 pages, a kind of plot synopsis. And then maybe they will, depending on if they're a published writer already, they might take that to a publisher, and a publisher will, if they like it, agree and then set up a team with them. Or what's more common nowadays is that the writer and an artist will do some kind of sample, and they'll do the sample art, In that case, the writer also normally writes a script. And the script is a little bit like a film script, but not exactly. But you can have the plot and a kind of description of what the whole story is about, who the characters are, what's the whole point of the story. And then the script outlines from the writer to the artist what happens on each panel. And of course, the panels are those frames, the squares that you see in comics. And then they often also outline what the characters say, which is in the round speech balloons. And then the rectangular or square caption boxes. The writer writes all of that, or not necessarily, because there's different ways of doing it. Sometimes the writer can more or less just write a kind of short story in more or less prose format, with possibly only the pages specified.
Okay.
And then the artist will break it down into the panels and the speech balloons, and then the writer will come back in again and finish off the dialogue once the artist has broken it down. That's not the way I do it. That's what used to be called the Marvel way, or still is possibly. I don't read Marvel comics nowadays. But what I do is what's called a full script format, which is where you do break it down, not just to the page, but to each specific panel, and describe to the artist what you think is going to be in each panel, such as, for instance, a dog suddenly appears in the distance. Panel 2, we see closer to the dog's face. Panel 3, the dog suddenly looks up. Panel 4, its young master is there. Its master is an 8-year-old boy. The boy looks happy. You can describe the basic flow of a story, and you can see, that's already a small story starting there, just off the top of my head. Not a very good one, maybe, but you can see how the story begins to develop.
Yeah.
And you then work with the artist in an intimate dance to bring the thing alive. And normally the artist will get that full script or the general plot, come up with rough pencil sketches, send them to you as the writer so that you can discuss how this thing might be slightly wrong, or should we do that better? And the artist will often have ideas which you didn't think of as to how to visualize that, or how to break it down into the kind of panel structure across the page. Or they will ask you, is this what you were thinking as the writer? And you can say, yes, that's fine, or that's not quite what I was thinking. And that in that way, it's like a director and an actor working on set together. And again, I'm just using this film analogy because it's an easy way to visualize it.
Yeah.
I'm not saying comic books are like films. Comic books are their own art, their own art medium, their own art form, which have their own way of doing things, their own grammar, and their own kind of sophistication. But we can think of it roughly in film terms because it's easy to visualize. And then normally what happens is you go to the ink and the artist, and in the American system it will often be a different artist who is specifically an inker. And then it would be inked, and then it would be lettered. And again, this could be by the same artist as it normally is in Japan, or it could be by 3 or 4 or even more different artists as it is in America. In Britain, it was normally 3, a writer, an artist, and then someone else would ink the, I should say letter, can I say. I start speaking Japanese. Someone should do you do that sometimes in Japan? You start speaking Japanese and don't realize till a few seconds later.
That's true. That is true. Definitely.
So there is someone who letters it, although in the Japanese system, normally the publishing house will letter it, and so the artist delivers the script, and then someone in the company will letter it. So there's different ways of doing it according to different companies in different countries. But the basic point, sorry, I'm going on too long now.
No. Please continue. This is interesting.
This is a very brief summary already, because the thing about comics is that manga is that it's quite a complicated, detailed, long process, and that is not known. People just think that somehow the artist just draws the stuff straight away, and the writer just sticks in what they say afterwards, like after the artist has done the whole story. And, I'm not sure how that kind of magic alchemy would work, but no, it's worked out step by step in detail, the same way as films are long, complicated processes. But when we watch a film, it looks like it's been done so smoothly. And it's the same with comics. You read a comic, if it's been done well, you don't see the effort in how it's been made. But there has been a lot of effort in making it, and it has more than one, many advantages over movies and films. But the first advantage that comic books have over films is there's much less money involved, and therefore that means there can often be far more art involved. Because if you have a movie, which is one of the reasons why a lot of movies now are based on comic books rather than the other way around, which is because if you're talking about, you said you like Daredevil. Frank Miller in the early 80s, when he was taking big steps forward with Daredevil.
Yeah.
When did he start that? Was it 78, 79? I forget, but anyway, late 70s, early 80s. You can take chances with a comic book because each issue, that issue is only going to cost $10,000 to make. Well, it's a lot of money still, $10,000, but the film's going to cost $100 million.
Yeah.
Right? Now, if you have a financial risk, again, this is in capitalism, of $100 million, you can't take all that much artistic risk with that. You've got to make $100 million back on the box office.
There's got to be a lot of formula in there. There's got to be stuff that's going to make money, that will make money in advance.
Yes. And so the problem with needing to make money is that you need to normally play it safe and keep it at a certain lowish level or predictable level.
Which is why I think, for example, like with this new Daredevil series, it's a Netflix original. And one of the cool things with the Netflix originals is you see the risk. Because it's not a network TV thing. Like, they can literally do what they want to do. Well,
of course, good movies are made and good television series are made. And it seems that nowadays, good TV series are actually far more creative than movies.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
there's been quite a shift there.
Good things can be done, obviously. But the point we have to remember is that normally good things are done despite that money situation, not because of it. Right? It's because those actors or those writers, those actors, those producers want to do something good, despite all those financial constraints, and sometimes it works out. So the things with comics is that because comic books have, they're just much cheaper to make in the first place. There's more freedom, interesting, intelligent, new, or sophisticated. Why, as I say, big normally based nowadays on comics, but rarely the other way around.
Okay, yeah.
You don't see comics chase movies as much as you do the other way around.
We're sorry, the number you have dialed is not in service at this time.
Yeah, so I'm curious. Now you're here in Japan. You're working in the Japanese manga industry. Is it necessary to be able to speak, to read, to write Japanese very well in order to do what you do?
It's not necessary, but that would be far preferable. When people ask me about that, as I say, they quite often do. What I say to them is that, well, first of all, you would need to come to Japan. And that's a very fundamental problem, which I think would maybe not even occur to most people who are wanting to do this from France or Canada or Britain, is that Japan is a kind of face-to-face meeting culture.
Ah, yes, very much so.
And that's an absolute basic cultural point which you wouldn't know until you come to Japan, or maybe you've dealt with some Japanese people and you think, aha, that's how they like to do things. in a variety of businesses, not just comic books. So they like to have face-to-face meetings. So that means that if you email them from Wisconsin or Birmingham, England in this case, and just send them your samples, I think the chances are far less than if you were going to send it to DC Comics or some French company who are used to dealing with things on email. Japanese people still prefer to have face-to-face meetings, partly as it's an element of Japanese culture to do so. And therefore you have to come to Tokyo and meet with the editors. But of course, obviously that is a financial burden straight away for most people. But if you can do that, the good news is that you probably can get a meeting with those editors. So in a way, it's the other way around. If you want to work with DC or Marvel, you can email them, right? You can send a package in. But if you just called them up and said, "Can I have a meeting?" I'm in New York next week, then maybe it'd be a bit tough. But Japanese publishers have this tradition of being accessible in terms of meeting their editors.
Oh, okay.
Right. And again, this is a cultural. I don't know where that tradition comes from, but anyway, it's there.
No, but I mean, I completely agree. I mean, that's the reason why, for example, even for example, where I work right now, often you would think, why not? Can people do Skype interviews? And for the most part, maybe an initial interview might be over Skype, but they actually want people who are serious about it to come here and actually do like an in-person kind of like, say, a demo teaching lesson. And I think that also shows a certain amount of dedication and kind of focus, maybe, that they really want to do it.
It may be that is the reason in the area that you're talking about. I don't think that's the reason for comic books.
Well, mind you, okay, I don't know anything about comic books, but at least maybe like, but I think there's an element of they actually want to meet the person. Like
they certainly want to meet them. Yes.
They want to actually meet them. They don't just want to see their image on a computer screen. They actually want to meet them and to look at them and to read them when they talk and see how what their character's like and how they can, kind of. I think there's definitely more of a personal thing in Japan.
Yes, and then the next thing, of course, is that there's various little routines or rituals which Japanese people go through. And as you know, if you go to their office, they're going to sit you down at a specific table, which is used for guests, and they'll bring out tea. And you'll notice that quite often they don't actually drink the tea. Right? The people who are there as the company people, they generally don't drink the tea. It's just a kind of a symbolic thing for the most part. And so there's certain small, subtle things which are difficult for someone who doesn't have a relatively good understanding of Japanese culture. But on the other hand, they're kind enough not to expect you to know these kind of subtle points if you're not Japanese, right? But anyway, so the first thing is that you really need to turn up at Kodansha's office, right, or Kadokawa or whatever publisher that you like, and you can ring them up, or again, it would have to really be a Japanese person will ring them up on your behalf, because if you just ring them up speaking in English, generally speaking, there's not going to be a success. So you get some. If you don't have to necessarily speak Japanese yourself, but you have to be here and turn up in person. And if so, go with the Japanese person who has called on your behalf that can we have a meeting with such and such magazine next Tuesday, kind of thing. And normally they will give you a meeting. And so you go along with the Japanese person and bring your samples and basically just shut up, right? Because it would, especially, I'm sorry to say this, but especially Americans, the tendency to think you got to talk, says he talking a lot right now. But
you're on a podcast. That's what you're supposed to do. It's okay. That's what we do.
The best thing would be to go there with your stuff, with your samples, your visual samples, and let your Japanese friend do the talking and just follow what they're doing. And you quite often it will look like maybe the Japanese editor is not at all interested in you, because they'll just be like, so, yeah, wakaru. And they're very uncommunicative.
Okay.
But that doesn't mean they're not interested in what you've got. If it's an interesting story or an interesting thing, they're not going to be like, "Wow, this is great" or "awesome," as you said at the beginning we were talking. They're going to speak like that, right? It might look like they've no interest at all, but that's just their normal way of communicating. But they may actually be very interested. So you just go along, let your Japanese friend do the talking for you, unless your Japanese is good. And if you're really lucky, then they might suggest something that you can do. In my case, that's pretty much what I did several years ago.
Okay.
Went along with my Japanese, still not brilliant, but it was considerably worse then. And so I went along with my Japanese colleague, and we went to Karakawa, we went to Shigaka, we went to Kodansha, we went to Seirin Kogeisha, which is a small independent publisher. We went to various publishers.
Okay.
And as with all these kind of artistic things, most of the time it's going to be a no. But I was lucky enough to get a contract with Kodansha, and then also with Seirin Kogeisha, the small publisher, and also with a Keitai cell phone company. So I got 3 successes out of that effort.
Wow.
And maybe it was about 6 or 7 failures too. But that was a mixture of working out how to do it in that kind of way, just being there in their office, and and having good ideas to present to them, and a bit of luck.
Cool. So I mean, it is doable, but like
it's doable. Very, very, very difficult, but doable.
Very, very difficult, but I mean, it's a matter of, I guess, will, determination, getting here, getting on the ground is the key.
Well, that's the first thing. You got to get here and maybe establish some Japanese friend who is willing to help you, and then go into their offices with a good package. And a good package does not mean, and this is a very important point, 100 pages worth of sketches of a character who looks exactly like a million other manga characters that have ever been made. This is pretty much a waste of time. What it has to be is a story, which means panel by panel, or comma, as they say in Japan. You have to show your ability to visually tell a story. So there's no point coming with sketches of individual characters, even though you've enjoyed doing them. That's not going to get you a manga contract. Definitely not. You have to show your ability to tell a story over panels. And you have to also be willing to work very hard, because if you do get a manga contract, they're going to really push you and get you to do things very quickly, the same as in the anime and the gaming world as well.
So you've got to produce and produce at a good rate.
Yes, and I went to, on the same afternoon, I went to Kodansha, which is the biggest publisher in Japan, and I suppose the biggest in the world, but anyway, certainly one of the biggest. And on the same afternoon, we went to Seirin Kogeisha, which is one of the smallest in Japan. On the same afternoon, we went to both of them. But the thing is, they actually said fundamentally the same things, even though one is a small company, one's this huge corporation, which is show us the stories which only you can do. And that's a key piece of advice which people who want to work in manga should think of, is not just sketching these stereotypical manga characters and not coming up with yet another stereotypical story, but what can I tell as a story? And that has to be something based on what you really are interested in, what you care about, your own personal experience, of course. Only you can tell your personal experience, but something interesting and original. That's the key thing that they're looking for.
Awesome. Well, Sean, I'm curious. Would you be able to tell the Just Japan podcast listeners a little bit about some of your better known works, some of the titles that are out there that people can maybe find in places like Amazon.jp or different things? What have you done?
Well, I've done a lot of books now, and only about half of my books are actually manga. And the ones which are manga are the ones which basically I work with Japanese artists on.
Okay.
And then the other half I work with British artists, Swedish, American, French. I worked with a whole bunch of different artists from all over the world.
Wow.
And my biggest selling book so far is a visual version of A Christmas Carol, Charles Dickens, of course. And that was with a team of British artists who have worked on Batman and Superman and Wonder Woman and Doctor Who. And so that one, of course, that one will be available in any bookshop in Britain or America. And in Japan, the best place to get my books is the Kinokuniya bookstores.
Okay.
And most of the big Kinokuniya bookstores have some of my books. And they normally have the Japanese orientated ones, the manga ones. So my biggest selling one on that type so far is a visual version of the Book of Five Rings, Gorin Osho, which is Miyamoto Musashi, who of course is the most famous swordsman in Japanese history, and who lived and died here in Kumamoto by coincidence. His body was taken up to the kind of ceremonial burial place, but just 5 minutes from where I'm talking to you now. So we did a kind of what we hoped was a kind of sophisticated manga version close to his original book, which is from 1644 or is it 1643? I'm forgetting now. And he wrote that when he was here in Kumamoto, literally in a cave. Okay. In the mountains, and so it's about basically the swordsman, the Bushido type philosophy, and a very interesting book. And we've made a visual version, which we hope makes it more accessible to maybe people who don't want to read just text-only books, which is, of course, unfortunately, most young people nowadays. So the good thing about manga is that we have the text, which it is in English, but it should be close to the Japanese original because the translator is William Scott Wilson, who just happens to have the same family name as me. It's a very erudite American translator of Chinese and Japanese. Okay. So our books are based on his, and so that's the Book of Five Rings, and we've done about I'm losing count now, 9 books of that type, in which we try to make take Japanese history and make interesting but authentic visual versions. And what I mean by authentic is that we try to actually research it, try to get the clause right and the way they spoke right and the story right as far as history can establish that anyway. And so we've done visual versions of the 47 Ronin, and there was a movie came out with what's his name? Keanu Reeves. And which was a terrible movie, unfortunately. But our sorry, but it was our manga version is much closer to what was considered to be historical facts of that story. Okay. And we've done a book called Secrets of the Ninja, which again is closely connected to the real ninja's practice and approach to secret warfare. And we have done Yakuza Moon, and Yakuza Moon is the real story of a Osaka gangster's daughter, and that's available. And we've done Hagakure, and Hagakure is also a real Japanese philosophy book on Bushido. Okay. And I've done that's just the Japanese ones which people in Japan can get a hold of. In Kinokuniya, but anyone listening to this in other parts of the world, I've done a whole bunch of non-manga type books as well. So the latest one is my own autobiography, which is called Once Upon a Time in Morningside, which is set in the Scotland of my childhood.
Okay, nice. And I mean, we're gonna put definitely like links in the show notes to all of this stuff, guys. So you can
Thank
find it
you.
all. And I'm curious, actually, do you have a website, like a kind of a one-stop shop where people can go and find all this stuff?
Yeah, sure. So there's my website, which is Sean Michael. What is it? I forgot. I forgot it myself. Sean Michael Wilson at Weebly.com.
Okay.
And yeah,
And I'm going to have a
uh,
link to that in the show notes. So
yes,
don't worry. Everyone, just go to the show notes. Just Japan Podcast, episode number 114. It's all there.
it's funny. Forget your own website. I'm just looking now. Yeah, SeanMichaelWilson.weebly.com. And yeah, all the books are listed there. I've written 22 books,
Wow.
I think it is so far.
Oh, cool.
I've been busy.
You're a busy man. Now I'm curious, as we wrap things up in a technically run amok type of night. We both had a lot of issues on either end with internet and all that stuff. You live in Kumamoto, and I'd be remiss to ask you, because I mean, I did actually listen to a BBC interview. You were interviewed by BBC after the earthquakes happened. The recent earthquakes in Kumamoto. I guess kind of short version. How the I have think knock on wood. I have not experienced a big earthquake. What was it like to experience those earthquakes, and how is Kumamoto coming along now? How's the recovery process?
It's funny you said the short version. You've probably heard of the philosopher and political activist Noam Chomsky, a linguist, and when his kids ask him about some complicated thing, because he can go on and on and on, because he's so smart, they say, Dad, give us the 10-minute version. I'll try and give you the 30-second version of the Kumamoto earthquakes. Well,
I'll give you a bit more time than 30 seconds. Don't worry.
Well, it was horrible. It was terrible. I was sitting here talking to my friend, and we were planning to go out on Saturday night, and then everything started shaking, obviously. And everybody in Japan, you have it in the back of your mind that there may be a big earthquake strike at any moment, but you kind of think it probably won't happen to you in your lifetime, right? And then all of a sudden, it does, and the whole place is shaking, and your plans about what you're going to do, of course, they go out the window, because then it becomes just a physical thing. It becomes a fight or flight response, and there's nothing to fight against. So the only thing you can do is fly. And so I have a kind of after the Fukushima and the tsunami problems before, I packed a bag ready, an emergency bag, and it's been at the doorway for 5 years. But I was in such a panic, I ran out the house without it. It's quite stupid. So
I think they call those go bags, right?
Well, there's a go bag. Well, I left my go bag way behind, so I ran out, and of course it's very warm now, but it was actually still a little bit cold then, and so everybody was outside. There's a bunch of Chinese students who live above me, and the Chinese guy's dad had just come over from China. He was out literally in his pants, and we're all shocked. My God, it's actually happened, and obviously, it's like in the movies where everything's shaking from side to side, and you feel like you're on ground which has become sea because it's kind of moving. You can feel the movement underneath, and if you manage to get back into your house, the whole thing is on the floor. Books are everywhere. Everything's smashed. It's a nightmare. But you're just happy that you've managed to get out. But of course, I think in the end, 44 people were killed. And around about 300,000 people were temporarily homeless. So it was a major, major problem. There was a few days in which it looked like we might run out of food. The shops here were useless. The kind of emergency systems, the kind of making my political point here. The socialistic type ones worked very well. The volunteer type ones worked very well. But all the kind of capitalist shops, within a couple of days, they had almost no food at all. Okay. So it did look like, there was a couple of days where it looked like, what are we going to eat here? And the water was cut off for, as I say, about 300,000 people. Gas was off for most people. And so there was a few days when you think, my God, we're in a disaster. This is a disaster. But this is where the good element of Japanese culture comes in. The Henan Sho disaster evacuation shelters were very well run, calmly run by volunteers, and the self-defense force came in and delivered us kind of curry rice meals and stuff like this. And so we were all right in the end. Most people, although as I say, 44. I think in the end the count was 44 people.
Well, I mean,
lost their lives.
Obviously, Kobe is no stranger to disasters, right? No, I mean, I was nowhere. I was a university student in Canada at the time of the Kobe earthquake in '95, but I've been to the different museums here in Kobe, and I've been to the Earthquake Disaster Prevention Center, and I've talked to people who lived here, and that was the thing that took over. They were essentially cut off from everything. The government was no help, but the people. The people kind of rose to the occasion, and the volunteer groups. And actually, believe it or not, and a lot of people are shocked by this, but some of the people who did the most help were the Yakuza. The Japanese organized crime groups. I mean,
I heard that.
They mobilized, and they set up like food drives, and they got food to people and water to people and this and that. It was very interesting.
I didn't see or I didn't hear that in Kumamoto. And of course, the other thing which people often say is, well, the Japanese don't riot, they don't steal, they don't get violent. Well, of course, they do, but at a far lesser level. Than would happen will happen in Britain or has happened in disasters in America in the last 10, 20 years. And that's a very, very admirable thing. It's not that it doesn't happen, it does, but it happens very rarely. So I was very impressed by how well run the shelters were and how nice people were to each other. For instance, for some reason my water was not cut off. I don't know why, it's very strange, but the house next to me was. So I took them a bucket of water, and then the old Obanchan lady came to my house 2 or 3 days later, and we'd never spoken before actually. And it established a little connection between us. And she said, "Arigato gozaimasu." And this kind of neighborliness increased. So in a strange kind of way, even though people did die, and it was a major disaster, which certain elements of Kumamoto are going to take 10 or 20 years to recover from. The silver lining here is people were nice to each other in a way which actually kind of made you quite impressed with us clever human beings.
That is wonderful. The disaster is not wonderful, but it's amazing how sometimes those tough situations bring out such amazing qualities in people.
Yes, and we shouldn't forget that, because a lot of times, making a political point now, but a lot of times people say, we can't have anything other than this kind of greed-based system because people are basically greedy and selfish. Oh yeah? And that's not what I saw when a real disaster hit me.
Yeah.
I saw people being nice, cooperative, and trying to genuinely help their fellow human being. That's what I saw.
Yeah, exactly. Definitely. I agree. I have, luckily, I haven't experienced a disaster firsthand, a big one, and I hope I never do.
Yep.
But I think from what I've heard of the history of people here and what you see around the world in different places, no matter where you are, those tough moments definitely bring people together. Sean, I want to thank you for coming on the Just Japan podcast this evening. We've been all over the place, a lot of wonderful information. No, like really, like amazing.
Yeah,
stuff.
It's good.
Like I don't know anything about the comic industry, obviously, because it's not something I've ever worked in. And I think a lot of you guys out there listening are really going to take something from this. So one more time, what people want to find you online, how and all that stuff, how what you're doing online, how they can contact you. Can you mention your website again?
The website, which I forgot myself, is how can I forget it? It's my own name, Sean Michael Wilson @weebly.com.
Cool.
Weebly is Weebly, and all my books are online there. Please check out some of my books. Buy some of my books. Comic books are a very interesting, sophisticated art form, and if you're not buying comic books, you really should be. Comic books or manga, go and get some.
Go get some, folks. And you're going to find that link and all of the stuff for this week's episode of the Just Japan podcast at justjapanstuff.com. Go there, check it out. The link is there if you don't remember it. Sean, thank you.
Thank you very much, Kevin. My old Irish comrade.
Yeah, and that is it. All right, I want to thank Sean for taking the time to sit down with the Just Japan podcast and share his experiences as a professional manga writer here in Japan. It was a great interview. I certainly learned a lot from it, and that's one of the things I always say that I love about, putting together the Just Japan podcast each and every week, is I get to meet really interesting people who have really interesting stories and do things that I don't know anything about, but I get to learn with you at the same time, and we get to share the experience together. Now, of course, all of Sean's links will be in the show notes at justjapanstuff.com, so go there and you can find out how to communicate with Sean and how to view his work and see what he does. All right, folks, that does it for another week of the Just Japan podcast. Of course, you can always find us on iTunes, Stitcher Internet Radio, SoundCloud, Libsyn. We're all over the place. You can find me on Twitter at JLandKev. You can go like the Just Japan Podcast Facebook page. It's a great place to hang out to get lots of Japanese news, news on Japan, videos, pictures, all kinds of cool stuff. Link is in the show notes. You can follow me on Instagram at JLandKev. And you can, of course, follow me on YouTube at BusanKevin or JLandKev. And check out my nature photography page. I love doing nature photography. It's something that I'm really into. Facebook.com/birds of Kansai. It's a thing that I love to do. I think I take pretty darn good pictures. So check it out. All those links will be in the show notes at justjapanstuff.com. Okay, just another thing I wanted to mention, folks. I'm going to be putting together a monthly newsletter, a Just Japan podcast newsletter, and I'm trying to put together an initial mailing list. So if you're interested in being part of that mailing list, I'm going to be using the mail service MailChimp, but I want to put together an initial list, and that's already been building. Quite a few of you have already sent me your email addresses. But send me an email at justjapanpodcast@gmail.com, justjapanpodcast@gmail.com, and just put your name down and say, hey, I want to be included in the email list. And of course, your email address will already be attached. Essentially, it's going to be some kind of news items, things that most people won't hear about, kind of a quote-unquote, air-quote, secret thing. It doesn't cost anything, completely free. I just need your name and your email address. It's going to be news about the podcast, upcoming ideas, things, if there's going to be meetups or stuff, or giveaways or draws, pictures about Japan, little extra, kind of like private blogs about Japan. I'll write little articles about Japan for you guys. So this is about community building. So it's more about building community and a tighter knit community. So the Just Japan podcast newsletter, it's going to be coming out in the near future. It'll probably be a monthly thing. So I'll put together a summer newsletter once I build more of a list and I get everything is set up on MailChimp. So again, if you're interested in a free, the Just Japan podcast newsletter, it's going to be sent in PDF form through your email. Send me an email at justjapanpodcast@gmail.com and say, hey, Kevin, I want to be included in the email newsletter. And send it along quickly because I'm going to be putting together that mailing list. And once I do, though, and it's out on MailChimp, you guys will have opportunities to join in because, it's something I want to build bigger and bigger. So that's the last thing I wanted to talk about. So you guys are awesome. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to the podcast, to download the podcast. You can always contact me anytime on Twitter, on Instagram, on Facebook. Don't try to contact me on YouTube. The worst way to do it. Get me on Facebook, on Twitter, or send me an email directly at justjapanpodcast@gmail.com. Or leave a comment on the show notes page at justjapanstuff.com. Those are the best ways to do it. So that's it for another week of the podcast. You guys are awesome. I really appreciate the fact that you guys took the time to download the podcast, to listen to it, to enjoy it, and to share it with your friends, of course. Oh, yeah. That's it for me, Kevin O'Shea, the host of the Just Japan podcast from Kobe, Japan. I will be talking to you in a week. So wherever you are in the world, I hope you're happy. I hope you're healthy. I'll be talking to you soon.
Kevin in Japan.
Hey everyone, so it's Kevin. It's story time. As I walk down a back alley somewhere, I'm not sure exactly where I am, somewhere in Japan, by the train tracks. And I want to tell you a story of something that happened to me several years ago. Back in early 2004, I was living and working in downtown Seoul in Korea, and I was living in this really old, rustic neighborhood. And I was working at this big school teaching adults. And every afternoon I would come home during my break, and I'd take a little rest, I'd hang out in my apartment. And it was the kind of neighborhood where it was just basically filled with like a lot of old people who were retired and had nothing else to do, pensioners, old men who would sit outside and drink soju all afternoon. And you recognized all the faces after a while. I lived there for about a year, and I got to know who everyone was. And if there was ever any kind of strange people in the neighborhood, you notice them. The people who lived in the neighborhood, I almost got hit by a car there. The people in the neighborhood, they knew me, so there you go. So one day I'm walking home from work, and my apartment was at the corner of an intersection. There was like a convenience store, an old kind of mom and pop convenience store that was a kitty corner to it. And I'm walking up the street, and I see parked in the middle of the intersection this black Jeep with tinted windows and like a red cherry on top, a cherry light. And I knew that was a police Jeep, but like not regular police, not beat cops, but like special police, like kind of detectives or secret police, the kind of people who probably in the 1980s made a lot of democracy protesters disappear, those kind of police. Kind of knock on your door in the middle of the night. Not anymore, but in the 70s and 80s in Korea. So I'm walking up the street, and there's a guy standing outside of the van, or the Jeep, wearing a black suit with a black overcoat, black sunglasses. He looks like one of the agents from, The Matrix, and he's standing there and he's just staring at me. And as I walk past him, he's staring at me, and he's staring at me. And I'm walking up the steps of my apartment, and I look down, and the guy's still staring at me. This guy, like, really kind of freaked me out. Typical Korean, like, police box cops or beat cops are not intimidating, really, in the way that, like, a policeman from, like, Canada or America would be. Typically, police in Canada or America are really big dudes, and they've got body armor, which makes them look bigger. They're very serious about what they do. They're packing like a 9mm. They're big and intimidating, normally. But the Korean cops are usually not. Like, they don't wear body armor. They've got like little pea shooter looking guns, like little 38s or something. And they're just. But these guys were not regular cops, and I knew that. And this guy fucking, he freaked me out. Oh, I said a bad word. He freaked me out. So, okay. So, as I'm walking up the stairs, I'm looking down at this guy. I lived on a third floor apartment. He does a little thing where he talks into his cuff, I think, and he hit it like an earpiece. And okay. So I go to my apartment, and it's really hot. So I'm kind of stripping down to my underwear, something more comfortable, so I can relax for a few hours before I go back to work. And I sit down, and about 5 minutes later, there's a knock on my door. So I quickly throw on my clothes, and I run to the door, and wearing like shorts and a t-shirt. And I get to the door, and there's another guy, with a black suit, black trench coat, black sunglasses, standing at my door. And he looks at me, and this guy freaked me out, And he looks at me and says, ID. And I was like, huh? And he looks at me and says, police. It didn't quite sound like Arnold Schwarzenegger, but police. I'm the police, he said. And I said, police. And he pulled out like a thing from his pocket, like a wallet type thing with an ID badge, and like a badge and like an ID card. It looked pretty damn official to me. And he was polite in a kind of scare the shit out of you kind of way. And he said, ID. So, okay. So I run and get my alien registration card, which is my foreigner ID card. I guess in Japan now they call them gaijin cards. Well, not officially. So I get him that card. I get him my passport. And he takes a look at my passport, and he looks at my passport. And he looks at my visa, and he looks at my ID card. And then I get him one of my business cards, because I had business cards. I worked at a well-known adult language school with a good reputation that hired professional people. I showed him that, and he looked at my ID, and then he pulled something out of his pocket, like a picture, and he was looking at the picture, looking at my ID, picture ID, picture ID, picture ID, and then he gave my ID and my passport back to me, and then he kind of looked behind him and down below where the guy was on the road, and he kind of shook his head. And I'm like, what the fuck is going on here? And then he hands a picture to me, and he says, do you know him? And it's a picture of a foreign man. It looks like a surveillance photo. It looks like he's leaning against a wall outside of a nightclub. It's kind of a black and white surveillance photo. And the dude looks just like me. It's not me, but damn, he looked like me. At the time, I had a lot more hair. The hairline was down further. It was black. And it was really, I used to gel, it was all spiky. And I had a little soul patch thing here. And the dude looked just like me. I was like, wow. So that was freaked me out. I'm like, no, I don't know this guy. And I gave him the photo back, and the guy said, sorry, and he left. And I was like, what the hell? So I get back to work that evening. I tell the story to a lot of my Korean coworkers, and they said they'd actually seen on the news that recently, or like the night before, a couple of days before, a foreign man had attacked a Korean taxi driver in the club district and beaten him and ran away. And apparently they were looking for the guy, and they think he lived in the neighborhood I lived in. That's when he was last seen. And I'm assuming this was like a surveillance photo of the guy taken from, was I get hit by another car? This was a surveillance photo taken of the guy, and I think it was on TV apparently, because one of my coworkers said they saw the story on TV and they showed a photo of the guy, and someone in my neighborhood who sees me walking along every day, and I looked like the guy, called the cops on me. But yeah, that was freaky. Freaky. So there you go. Another brush with the police by Kevin. But like the first time I didn't do anything, so it was okay in the end. Pretty freaky, huh? So there you go. Another story by Kevin as I walk down the street in Japan.
Kevin in Japan.
If you got a minute to spare, don't go anywhere, stay right there, 'cause Kevin is about to speak. Stay in peace on the street, what a